Hey, welcome back everybody. Last time we talked about creating observable streams using the apply and the create methods. But if you recall the lecture on creating futures, there we used this concept of promises. And as it turns out, there's a corresponding concept for observables, and they're called subjects instead of promises. And in this lecture, we will drill down a little bit into subjects and compare and contrast them with promises. So let's refresh our memory what promises are. Here's the use of promises to implement map. So what we did is to implement map over future. So we want to, this is defined on future of t. We take a function from t to s, and we have to return a future of s. And the way we did that is by creating a new promise, wait for the future, the this to complete. If it completed successfully, we would call f. We had to kind of wrap this around a try-catch because the f can fail too. This is the thing that we didn't do when we implemented map for observables. We ignored error cases here, but then we return the future corresponding to a promise. So a promise is an object that has a future, all right? But then there's no kind of interface, special interface, to describe just the fact that you can set the future, okay, or you can complete the future. In Rx, we did that slightly different. So here's the promise recap. So we have a promise. You can get the future of the promise, and then you can complete the promise, and you can listen on the future with on complete, and then you get passing the callback try of t to unit. All right? So you could say a promise has a future. Now in Rx we already have two interfaces. This is the observer side where you can kind of pump in a value, and this is the observable side. So the corresponding concept in Rx is a subject, and a subject is an observer and an observable. So you can subscribe on the one side, and you can kind of push in values on the other side. Now there's two big differences with promises. The first thing is that we can also we have this extra method to complete the subject but uncompleted, and there's on error and on next. And remember that with promises, if you would try to call complete twice and you would call it on an already completed promise, it would throw an exception, and there you had to use try complete. In subjects, when a subject has been completed with on complete or on error, and if you then call any of these methods again, they will just do nothing. Okay, they won't throw. So I think that's a slightly simpler design, because then you don't have to kind of think about, like, do I use try on next or whatever. No, you just do on next. And if the subject has already been closed by one of the terminal methods, the value is just dropped on the floor. Okay, but what happens is when you subscribe on this side, when you call on next, that value is propagated through all the subscribers. So in some sense, a subject is very much like a channel where on the one side you can pump in values that you can receive on the other side. So that's the picture here. So let's look at our code. And there's several kinds of subjects. So in this case, we're using the publish subject, which is the simplest one. That's just a simple pipe. So here we create a publish subject. That's the channel. We subscribe to it by and print things out. And then when we push 42 on the channel, 42 will be delivered on those guys. Now we unsubscribe one of them, and then now that subscriber will not receive any more values. We push the next value, and that will be kind of delivered here. Now we complete the channel. We subscribe to it with C, And what we will see is that C now immediately will get on completed, and B will get on completed as well. And when we call on next again, nothing will happen. It will just be dropped on the floor. But what is interesting to see is that when you subscribe to a channel, to a published subject that has already been closed, you will get the uncompleted. And similarly, you will get the on error. Now, one of the things that you may have thought of is that when you're using this published subject, you're missing all the values. When you subscribe later, when you're too late, you only get the kind of, all the new values, but you don't see any of the history. And for that, we have a replay subject, and the replay subject has a memory of all the values that have been pushed into it. And when you subscribe later to it, it will replay all those values. Now, of course, that's a little bit dangerous because it means that a replay subject should have unbounded memory. And there are several overloads of replay subjects where you can say, only remember the last 1,000 values, or only remember the last 5 minutes of values, and so forth. Now, the replay subject is used a lot in RxAndroid, where if you're doing some actions, you might want to save some values as you're making a transition, and then when you resubscribe, you don't want to lose any values there. So it has very practical uses. And then the other subjects that we have are the async subject, and the async subject caches the final value. So if you have a stream, it just remembers the final value. So it's a little bit like a future, but where the last value is the value of the async subject. And then there's the behavior subject that caches the latest value. So when you kind of subscribe to that, you're getting the latest value. And that kind of behaves like a behavior. If you have ever heard of FRP behaviors, the behavior subject is kind of, corresponds to that. Okay, so this is a brief introduction to subjects. I often recommend against using subjects for two reasons. First of all, subjects are like mutable variables. As I said, you're pushing things in on one side, you're receiving things on the other side. They don't play very well with the notion of back pressure, which is something that we will only touch upon in the jam sessions. But it's better to there's also overloads of publish that don't use a subject, but are defined on a stream, and where you pass in a function that gets an observable, and then you can subscribe multiple times. So the overload of publish that uses a function is the one that you should use. But in most cases, you don't need subjects. And if you find yourself needing a subject, you can probably rewrite your code not to use it. Okay, so but sometimes they are very useful, just like sometimes a little bit of mutable state is very convenient. All right, thank you so much, and see you in the next lecture.